The morning in Osogbo broke with a grey sky and a quiet that did not feel like peace. It was the quiet that came after too many prayers and too few answers. Aduni stood in the doorway of her mother's hut, clutching the woven bag that held everything she dared to carry. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was leaving behind and what she was hoping to find. Inside, her son Lio, barely 7, slept restlessly. His breathing had grown shallow over the last moon. The fever came and went like a tide that would not retreat. Herbalists had tried, water had been blessed, offerings had been made to Osanyin, but nothing stayed the sickness. The elders said his thread was thinning. The Babalawo said the boy's destiny was caught in a knot that only a greater journey could untie. And so, a decision was made. Aduni would take him to Lagos, not to the hospitals. She had no money for those halls of glass and silence. She would seek the shrine of Ọya near the coastal edge. There, in the place where the winds met the sea and the Orisha of storms listened to those who had truly lost, she would speak her plea, not to beg for mercy, but to ask for strength. She wrapped Lio in a soft cloth, whispered a chant of protection into his ear, and lifted him onto her back. He didn't wake. His small body had grown too light. Osogbo, the sacred city of Osun, lay behind her like a story she could no longer rewrite. The trees of the grove had watched her childhood, the river had blessed her birth, but now the land was silent, not cruel, but finished with her, as if saying, "Your path goes forward, not here." The road to Lagos was not carved in stone. It was a patchwork of red dust, cracked paths and songs carried by traders. Aduni had no map, only names whispered to her in dreams. A shrine near Jebu, a woman in Sagamu who healed with her hands. A crossing in Ipi where the wind turned sharply and spirits answered. She walked. The sun did not rise. It crept, as if uncertain it should shine upon this journey. The first village she passed looked at her with curiosity, but no one stopped her. Her eyes spoke of something beyond explanation, the look of a woman who had nothing left to fear. She bartered her last beads for water. A kind man gave her dried cassava when he saw her son's limp legs. She nodded in thanks, too tired for words. By nightfall, she reached the edge of the Osun River's reach, where the trees no longer danced and the air thickened with dust. She found a broken shelter, a hut without roof, and laid Leo down. There, under a sky full of silent stars, she prayed. Not loudly, not with tears, but with a voice steady as stone. "Ọya, mother of winds, if you hear me, guide me. If my son's path must end, give me the strength to carry him with honor. But if breath remains in him, then blow your way open before us. Let your winds show me the path." A breeze passed over her shoulders, not enough to cool, not enough to answer, but enough to say, "Continue." Only the steady rhythm of her feet against the dry ground reminded Aduni that time was still moving. She had tied Lio to her back again, careful to shift the cloth every hour so his chest could rise more freely. He no longer stirred. The path narrowed as it crossed low hills. Occasionally, she heard movement in the bush, perhaps goats, perhaps spirits, but she didn't pause to check. Her ears were tuned not to danger, but to the sound of breathing from behind her shoulder. By midday, she reached a crossroads marked by a shrine, half swallowed by vines. The old mud idol had lost its eyes, but at its feet were offerings, kola nuts, cowrie shells, and a single feather. The air around it was still, reverent. Aduni approached and placed a small strip of cloth beside the other gifts. She whispered, "I do not ask to be spared, I ask to endure." As she turned to leave, a woman's voice behind her said, "Then you are already stronger than most." Aduni froze. An old woman sat under a tree, weaving palm fronds into rope. She hadn't been there moments ago. The woman's eyes were pale, not from blindness, but from distance, like someone who saw more than she should. "Where are you headed with a body so still on your back?" she asked softly. "To Lagos," Aduni replied, "to find the winds." The woman nodded. "The road is longer than you think, but shorter than you fear." Aduni didn't understand, but she bowed and continued walking. Behind her, the woman sang a tune without words, low, haunting, full of dust and memory. That night, the stars were hidden behind thick clouds. No rain came, only wind, fierce and sudden. Aduni found shelter in the hollow of a fallen tree, curling her body around Layo like a shell. He coughed once in his sleep. It was the first sound he had made in 2 days. She held him tighter and closed her eyes. In her dream, she was standing at the edge of a vast ocean, and from the waves rose a woman with 9 scarves flowing behind her, her skin the color of storm clouds, her eyes flashing like lightning. The woman did not speak. She raised one arm, and wind rushed around Aduni in a spiral, not to push her back, but to lift her. When Aduni woke, she was crying. But it was not sadness. It was recognition. The Orisha had heard. The road turned cruel as they entered the rocky lowlands near Osogbo. The path, once soft with dust, became jagged with gravel and hidden roots. Aduni's feet bled, but she walked as if numb, not from pain, but from the clarity of purpose. On the 3rd day, her food ran out. She drank slowly from the calabash she carried, giving the last mouthfuls to Layo. His lips were cracked, but he swallowed. That alone was enough to keep her moving. At sunset, she collapsed beside an abandoned yam barn. The smell of dried earth and old harvest clung to the air. She laid her son down and leaned against the wall, unsure if she would wake again if she closed her eyes. A voice broke the stillness. "You don't belong to this place, yet you carry its weight." Aduni opened her eyes. A young man stood a few feet away, wrapped in a plain wrapper, with a satchel slung across his back. His face was smooth, but his eyes had seen sorrow. "I'm going to Lagos," she said, not bothering to ask who he was. "So am I," he replied. "I take herbs from town to town. People say I have good hands." She glanced down at Layo. "Can you help him?" The man crouched beside the boy, opened his satchel, and pulled out a folded leaf. He sniffed it, muttered something into it, and tucked it into Layo's waistband. "Boil this tomorrow. Only when the wind shifts. You'll know when it's time." Aduni didn't ask what he meant. She just said, "Thank you." He stood to leave. The road to Lagos is not straight, but there is a river ahead. If you follow its bend, it will carry you closer to where the wind begins. And then he walked away without looking back. That night, as she boiled the leaf over a fire of damp sticks, the wind did shift. It came from behind her, strong, warm, and laced with the scent of rain. She fed the infusion to Layo in small sips. He coughed once, twice, and then his eyes opened, just slightly, enough to meet hers. "Mama," he whispered. Aduni gasped, choking on her breath. It was the first word he had spoken in over a week. She wrapped her arms around him and wept, the fire crackling beside them and the wind dancing softly through the broken walls of the yam barn. The next morning the land looked different, not easier, but brighter. She stepped back onto the road, her son tied again to her back, but now his breathing steadier, his fingers curled gently against her shoulder. The journey to Lagos continued, but now the wind was walking with her. That night, the sky turned black before the sun could properly set. The path had disappeared beneath her feet. Somewhere between Sagamu and the edges of Lekki, the road forked, and the fork forked again and again, until she no longer knew if she was walking toward Lagos or back to Osogbo. Her calabash was empty, her legs ached deep into the bone, her vision blurred. Layo was burning again. She felt it in the way his skin pulsed against her back. A low heat like coals hidden in cloth. His breathing was shallow once more, the small signs of recovery slipping away like smoke. A terrible thought crept into her mind. What if I am too late? She found shelter beneath the overhang of a collapsed roof, just 3 walls and broken wood. The wind had died completely. The air was thick, unmoving. Her chest felt heavy with a silence that mocked all her prayers. She sat down, unwrapped Layo, and held him in her lap. He did not wake. For the first time since she left Osogbo, Aduni's strength cracked. She cried, not softly, not with dignity, but like a woman whose bones were breaking from the inside. She buried her face in the child's neck, and her sobs rose into the night like birds in a storm. I have walked so far, she whispered, almost angrily. I have given everything. I have nothing left. If this is the end, then take me too. Let the wind stop. Let the sky break. But don't make me go on if it is for nothing. Silence answered. And then something stirred. Not outside, inside the broken room. The fire pit, untouched for years, began to glow. Just a flicker, a coal that hadn't been there before. No one had lit it. The sticks had long turned to ash. But now, without touch, a low orange ember pulsed, as if something had breathed onto the memory of fire. Then came the breeze. It didn't blow in through the doorway. It rose from the floor, circled her ankles, lifted her hair. It smelled of rain. It whispered like silk against her skin. She looked up. In the doorway stood a woman, or what looked like one, tall, draped in layers of deep red and white, her face obscured by a veil that shimmered like heat. Her presence filled the space not with fear, but weight. Her feet did not seem to touch the ground. The woman raised a hand, not to offer comfort, but to point, to the east. Then she vanished, as if carried away by the wind she had brought. Aduni stared for a long time, her tears now dry. She did not speak. She only nodded once and rose to her feet. She wrapped her son again, stepped out into the dark, and walked toward the east. 3 days passed between the yam barn and the outer edge of Lagos. The terrain shifted once more, not just in shape, but in spirit. The trees grew thinner, the wind more erratic. Sometimes it howled through the grass like laughter. Other times it stilled so completely that even her breath felt loud. Leo stirred more often now. He still did not speak again, but he moved his fingers and reached for her hand as she walked. Once, he pointed weakly toward a grove of trees, and when she turned her eyes to it, she saw a white egret standing perfectly still in the center of the path. It stared at her, then flew upward without a sound. By the time Aduni reached the eastern boundary of Lagos, the land had changed. The dust had been replaced by stones and broken roads. Motorbikes passed without slowing. Tin roofs shimmered in the heat. Markets buzzed with voices and vendors calling out prices in sharp bursts. But Aduni did not stop. She walked through it like a ghost. No one noticed the woman with a child on her back, wrapped in dusty cloth, her eyes full of stormlight. No one but one. At the edge of the Eep Lagoon, where the land kissed the sea, stood a shrine worn by salt and wind. Few came there now. It had been swallowed by the city's spread, but still it stood, a small house of stone crowned with 9 iron rods, swaying gently in the breeze. Aduni approached it with the reverence of someone arriving not to ask, but to offer. She set Layo down gently on a mat of woven reeds. He opened his eyes, just for a moment, and blinked at the sky. Then he slept again, not heavily, but peacefully. Aduni stepped forward. She raised her hands to the rods and the wind wrapped around her like a shawl. "Ọya," she said, her voice low but firm, "I have brought him. I have walked your breath from Osogbo to here. If you see him, see me too. If he has strength to rise, let him rise. If he does not, carry me too." There was no lightning, no voice, no thunder, Only a gust of wind that rushed through the shrine scattered the dust from the stones and wrapped around the sleeping boy. Layo stirred. He coughed, sat up, looked at his mother and said, "I'm hungry." Aduni collapsed to her knees, not in sorrow, but in thanks. Not just for his voice, not just for the breath returned to his lungs, but because she knew her journey had not been in vain. That night they slept inside the shrine. Aduni curled her body around Layo once more, not in fear this time, but in awe. His breath was strong. His skin had warmth again. In the dark, he murmured soft words, not prayers, not dreams, but the loose, drowsy thoughts of a child returning to the world. She whispered lullabies into his ear, songs her mother had sung, and her mother's mother before that. For the first time in many moons, her voice didn't crack. It flowed. In the early dawn, she stepped outside. Lagos stirred slowly in the distance. But here, at the edge of the water, time bent like the river. Fishermen passed silently in the lagoon, their canoes gliding like shadows. One of them raised a hand in greeting. She raised hers in return. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a blessing. Aduni knelt and dipped her hands into the lagoon. She did not ask for more. She only gave thanks. To Ọya, who had not promised comfort, but had honored the courage it took to walk through discomfort. To the wind, which had not spoken, but had carried her where she needed to go. To the spirits of the land, who had watched and waited, and then opened the door. She tore a strip from her wrapper and tied it to one of the shrine's rods, a red cloth, to flutter in the wind and say, "Someone survived." Years later, people would speak of a woman who walked from Osogbo to Lagos with a dying child on her back and nothing but faith in her chest. Some said she dreamed with Orisha. Others claimed the storm followed her and cleared her path. Children repeated her name during Harmattan nights, sitting by fires with their grandmothers, and by the shrine near Epi, the red cloth still danced. Faded now, yes, but not forgotten. Just like her story. Because in the heart of Nigeria, where rivers bend and winds remember, there will always be those who walk not for glory, but for love. And love walks far.